This is a paid advertisement from BetterHelp. Let's pause and take a moment to talk about something very important. Life has its pressures for everyone, and we often carry the immense weight of expectation to never show weakness, to hide our true feelings, and believe that asking for support somehow makes us less of a person. But bottling things up isn't the answer. It can often lead to feeling down, burnout, or other unhealthy habits. We want to normalize the idea that it's okay to struggle. Real strength actually comes from opening up about what you are carrying and doing something about it so that you can be at your best for yourself and everyone in your life. If you're feeling the weight of the world, or even if things just feel a bit off, I can't stress enough the value of talking to someone. It could be a friend, a loved one, or a therapist. We here at This Week Explained believe that therapy can be incredibly valuable. Whether you've been in therapy personally or not, the broader benefits are clear. It's so helpful for learning positive coping skills, understanding how to set healthy boundaries, and it really empowers you to be the best version of yourself. And it's so important to remember that therapy isn't just for those who've experienced combat or major trauma. It's a tool for anyone looking to improve their mental well-being and navigate life's challenges. That's why we're thrilled to talk about BetterHelp. With over 5,000 therapists in the UK, BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform, having served over 5 million people globally. And it clearly resonates with users, boasting an App Store rating of 4.9 out of 5 stars based on over 1.7 million client reviews. It's also incredibly convenient. You can connect with a therapist at the click of a button, helping you fit therapy into your busy schedule. And you can even switch therapists at any time if you feel it's not the right fit. And here's something special for our listeners. As the largest online therapy provider in the world, BetterHelp is offering our listeners 10% off their first month. What are you waiting for? Talk it out with BetterHelp. Once again, our listeners get 10% off their first month by going to betterhelp.com/thisweek. That's BetterHelp.com/thisweek. Tired of feeling overwhelmed by the headlines? Want to truly understand the why behind the global chaos? Then you are in the right place. Welcome to This Week Explained, your weekly deep dive into the most complex and impactful stories shaping our world. I'm Tiana, and joining me as always is Kervin. Before we jump into the crucial developments of the week, a quick favor. If you want to ensure you never miss an episode, make sure you're following or subscribed on your podcast platform. It literally takes 2 seconds and keeps you instantly updated. And if you are getting value from what we are doing here, a simple rating or review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify helps us reach more curious minds like yours. And don't forget the new interactive comments on Spotify. It's a fantastic way to engage directly with the show and other listeners, extending the conversation beyond the broadcast. You can also find more fantastic podcasts like ours by visiting leonmedianetwork.com, part of the awesome Leon Media Network. This week, we're looking at a world walking a tightrope. It's a delicate balance between desperately holding on to peace and the aggressive projection of power that threatens to shatter it. In Europe, we see this tension in the West's dual strategy against Russia, punishing new sanctions on one hand and an unprecedented plan to fund Ukraine's defense on the other. In Gaza, a fragile American-brokered truce is strained not just by renewed violence, but by a high-stakes political battle that could redraw the map. Meanwhile, the U.S. flexes its muscles in the Americas with a massive military buildup officially targeting cartels, but with clear undertones for Venezuela and China. And in South Asia, a long-standing alliance has crumbled into open conflict, igniting a dangerous new border war between Pakistan and the Taliban in Afghanistan. It's a world of fragile truces and new provocations. Let's start in Ukraine. And the big story this past week is the dramatic change in Washington's policy toward Russia and the war in Ukraine. For months, even years, the approach has been one of careful and at times hopeful diplomacy, but that seems to have come to a definitive end.
Yeah, it really does. What we're witnessing, or what we did witness this week, was the abrupt cancellation of that planned U.S.-Russia summit in Budapest we talked about last week. And this cancellation happened just days after it was put on the calendar. Now, almost immediately following the cancellation, President Trump announced new direct sanctions targeting Russia's two largest oil companies.
This feels significant because President Trump had long resisted this exact move, holding out for a diplomatic breakthrough and hoping to position the U.S. as a mediator. He had previously stated he would not impose these kinds of sanctions until European nations fully stopped buying Russian energy. So what changed? Why now?
I think the word the administration used was exasperation. The previous summit, that was one that was held in Alaska, it produced very little substance. So this time, it seems President Trump wanted to ensure a meeting would be productive before he was going to commit to it. So in preparatory talks between Secretary of State Marco Rubio and his Russian counterpart made it clear that the two sides were still miles apart on the core issues, the White House just pulled the plug. The sanctions appear to be a direct consequence of that diplomatic failure. President Trump has decided to use sanctions to force Putin to the negotiating table, this time in good faith.
Okay, but what are those core issues? Where is the sticking point that is so immovable it caused this entire strategy to shift?
I think it comes down to the situation on the ground. The U.S., with support from Ukraine and its European allies, they've been pushing for a ceasefire that's going to essentially freeze the current front lines. Now, while Ukraine has come around to this compromise, Russia has rejected this entirely. The Kremlin's stated objective remains to secure, at a minimum, the entire Donbas region. Now, since a large portion of that territory is still under Ukrainian control, there is simply no common ground for negotiation at this moment. From Moscow's perspective, there is no incentive to stop fighting.
Okay, so what has the reaction been from Moscow? Sanctioning the two giants of their economy can't be insignificant for them.
Yeah, and publicly, the Kremlin is projecting an image of resilience, claim they are immune to the pressure of these sanctions. And President Putin called the sanctions an unfriendly act. He stated that there's no self-respecting nation negotiates under this type of pressure. Now, others in Moscow have been far less diplomatic. Some other officials are calling this an act of war. The reality is that these sanctions are actually a serious move from the Trump administration. Though they may not force an immediate reversal of war policy, but they are a clear signal of Washington's frustration and a move to align more closely with allies like the United Kingdom. That country, of course, had already sanctioned these same companies previously.
That's a great point, the alignment with the allies, because while the U.S. is applying this direct pressure, the European Union is working on its own, very different form of economic leverage. I am talking about the controversial plan to use frozen Russian assets. So can you walk us through that? Because it sounds incredibly complex.
Yeah, it's both complex and unprecedented. Essentially, since the full-scale invasion began, the EU has frozen roughly 210 billion euros of Russian sovereign assets. Most of that is held at a single financial institution in Belgium. That institution's called Euroclear. The EU's proposal is to use the bulk of these funds, about 140 billion euros, as what they are calling a reparations loan for Ukraine.
Reparations loans, so they are not seizing the money outright. Like I said, this is very confusing. How does that work legally?
That's a great question because I think legality is the critical issue here. Now, under international law, you generally cannot just confiscate another country's sovereign assets. The workaround the EU is proposing is to effectively borrow the money from Euroclear and give it to Ukraine as a zero-interest loan. The loan would be backed by an IOU. That IOU is underwritten by all EU member states. The understanding, or perhaps the hope, is that Ukraine would repay this loan with war reparations it receives from Russia at the end of the conflict.
Yeah, that does not sound like something that will work. I can already see the potential problems. I mean, this entire plan hinges on Ukraine winning the war and Russia agreeing to pay damages. So what if Moscow refuses to do so?
Yeah, and what if, but what when, right? We know Russia's not going to agree to this, and look, precisely the multi-billion euro question here. If Russia does not pay, the EU would likely have to forgive Ukraine's debt, but the EU would still owe the money to Euroclear. Ultimately, that debt would fall to European taxpayers. It's a very difficult political position for many of these governments. Now, beyond that, there are serious concerns among central bankers that this sets a dangerous global precedent. It could undermine global financial stability by making other countries hesitant to store their assets in Western institutions. Why would they kind of hesitate? Because they fear their funds are going to be used as political leverage in the future.
Well, it sounds like a high risk, high reward strategy. Is everyone in the EU on board with this?
No, not all. And there are deep divisions here. Countries like Poland and the Baltic states are enthusiastic supporters. They also border Russia. Then you have other nations who are more sympathetic to Moscow. Country that we talked about last week, like Hungary, they are strongly opposed because they fear Russian retaliation on their pro-Russian government. Then you have countries like Belgium. That's where the assets are physically held. They're extremely nervous about the legal and financial liability, and that's because they would probably shoulder all of that if Russia challenges this in court. So they are demanding the Belgians are demanding that any risk be shared equally among all member states. And there's also disagreement on how Ukraine could even spend the money. Yeah, some obviously want it restricted to just military purchases from Europe, while Kyiv insists it needs full control to address its most urgent needs.
So we have the United States moving from diplomacy to direct sanctions, and the European Union attempting this very creative but very risky financial maneuver. It feels like a coordinated hardening of the Western position.
Yeah, and it is. Look, patience for the negotiated settlement, I think, has run out, at least for now. The strategy appears to be shifting toward long-term economic and financial attrition against the Kremlin's war machine. It's a race against time at this moment. And as we tend to say on this podcast, none of this is happening in a vacuum. Policymakers are dealing with multiple, simultaneous, high-stakes crises. A decision made on Russian sanctions that has ripple effects that's going to be felt in the Middle East, and actions taken there that can, in turn, influence the strategic calculus of nations in Asia.
That cascading effect is something we should definitely explore more here. It seems the era of single issue foreign policy is long gone, which brings us to our next topic. Let's turn our focus to the Middle East, where a very tense and fragile ceasefire continues to hold in Gaza. This agreement, brokered by the Trump administration, is now in its second week. So, Carvin, we have seen high-level American officials, including Vice President Vance, on the ground in Israel. It seems so precarious, especially after the flare-up last Sunday. What is your assessment of the stability of this truce?
Yeah, like this situation, as you said, is indeed precarious. But the heavy American involvement is a key factor here. Vice President Vance himself said the implementation is going better than expected. Those are his words there. That's an optimistic, if cautious, public stance. We did see the truce tested severely when Hamas killed 2 Israeli soldiers. That prompted a significant wave of Israeli airstrikes. Now, what is notable is that both sides quickly moved to reinstate the truce right after that happened. The United States is applying immense pressure to maintain momentum of this ceasefire. President Trump issued very stark warnings that if Hamas does not cooperate, its end will be fast, furious, and brutal. So while it is fragile, there is a powerful external force working to hold it together.
And his name is Trump.
Yes. I was going to make a Vin Diesel joke, but...
No, well, I mean, that's what I was thinking when he's fast, furious, and brutal. Yeah, there was going to be... There's a Vin Diesel joke in there somewhere.
Number 11.
Number 11?
Fast and Furious 11. Fast, Furious, and Brutal.
Oh.
Or do they already have 11? I don't know. I'm going. Let's get back to it.
Okay. So This truce is just the first part of a much larger, more complex peace plan. A term we are hearing a lot about is the quote unquote yellow line, and it refers to the boundary that Israeli forces have pulled back to. But it seems to mean very different things to different parties. So, can you talk to us about the significance of this yellow line?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. The yellow line here is the physical manifestation of the first stage of the ceasefire plan. It leaves Israel in control of just over half of the Gaza Strip. And for the United States, this is meant to be a temporary transitional boundary. It's a step towards further withdrawals. Now, for the far right elements within Prime Minister Netanyahu's coalition, this represents something entirely different. One Israeli newspaper even called it the new border. Now, their hope is that the next stages of the peace process will prove impossible to resolve. That's going to make this yellow line a permanent reality and potentially open up former Gazan land for new Israeli settlements.
If only someone on this podcast had predicted this to be the plan for Netanyahu's coalition. If only.
I think I deleted all those episodes.
But Prime Minister Netanyahu is walking a very fine line here, attempting to satisfy the demands of his American allies while also managing the expectations of his own domestic coalition partners. And those two entities seem at odds with each other.
Absolutely, and it is quite the challenge for Netanyahu. He needs to show the Trump administration that he is committed to the peace process, but he also cannot afford to alienate the base that keeps him in power. We saw him react very carefully to the Hamas ceasefire violation. The response was intense, but it was brief, and Israel was quick to emphasize that its soldiers were attacked inside that yellow line. It would essentially signal to the Americans that they were not the ones who were breaking the rules of the agreement. Hamas was. And he is trying to keep all of his options open in a situation where those options are actually narrowing.
And we saw that same internal political tension create external friction in a different arena this week, did we not? I am, of course, referring to the preliminary vote regarding the annexation of the West Bank.
Yeah, that was another significant development in Israel. So far-right politicians, though notably from Netanyahu's opposition, advanced a bill that would apply Israeli law in the West Bank. It was a symbolic first step, and it only passed by one vote, actually. Now, Prime Minister Netanyahu's office immediately moved to distance the government from it. They called the move a, quote, deliberate political provocation, end quote. And they stressed that his Likud party did not support this. They understand this is damaging, and then this move is going to be very damaging to their international relationships.
Symbolic or not, the U.S. reaction was swift and unequivocal.
Yeah, it was. The response from the Trump administration was perhaps the strongest signal we have seen of its red lines. Vice President Vance publicly called it and I want to quote him here, quote, very stupid political stunt, end quote. Secretary of State Rubio warned it was counterproductive and threatened the Gaza peace deal. President Trump himself stated that if Israel were to move forward with annexation, it would, quote, lose all of its support from the United States, end quote. So this was a clear and forceful message that while the U.S. is backing Israel on the Gaza ceasefire, the support is not a blank check for actions it fundamentally opposes, one of those being annexation.
So we have these two major developments, a fragile ceasefire in Gaza defined by the contentious yellow line, and a provocative vote regarding the West Bank. At the center of it all is a prime minister navigating immense pressure from his most important international ally and his own domestic political partners. It seems like the next phase of this peace plan, which involves disarming Hamas and establishing an interim government in Gaza, is where all these competing interests will truly collide. So how does he possibly navigate what comes next?
Yeah, look, that's the fundamental question here. The entire deal is built in stages with caveats. That allows him to tell different audiences what they want to hear. And Netanyahu's repeatedly stated that any violation by Hamas would allow Israel to return to war. For now, he has secured the return of some of the hostages while withdrawing to a line that is still strategically advantageous for the Israelis. But you are right. The second stage is the real test. Aligning the goals of Washington, which wants a stable, long-term political solution, with the goals of his partners, some of whom want the process to fail, will become exponentially more difficult. It's a high-stakes balancing act, just like you said at the very beginning of this, and the political space for him to maneuver is shrinking by the day.
A shrinking political space indeed. We will have to watch that very closely, but for now, we need to take a short break. When we return, we'll shift our focus from the fragile ceasefire in Gaza and turn our attention south to the Caribbean. So stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back, listeners. As we said before the break, we are shifting our attention south to the Caribbean. For the past several weeks, the United States has been conducting what is, by any measure, its largest military buildup in the region in decades. The official reason is a new aggressive campaign against drug trafficking, but the scale and type of forces being deployed suggests there is much, much more to this story. The picture that is emerging is complex, with multiple layers of strategy at play. So let's start there, Kervin. Lay out the board for us. What exactly are we seeing in terms of military assets, and what is the administration's stated purpose for putting them there?
Yeah, of course. So on the surface, the mission is straightforward. It's counter-narcotics. War Secretary Pete Hegseth announced a new joint task force that would be under U.S. Southern Command, or SOUTHCOM. It's was specifically put in place to, and I want to quote Secretary Hegseth here, quote, crush the cartels, end quote. This has been backed by direct action. The U.S. has now conducted at least 10 strikes on small vessels, so-called drug boats, in both the Caribbean and, for the first time, in the Pacific. Now, these strikes have resulted in over 40 fatalities.
And the force deployed to support this mission seems quite substantial.
Yeah, after this weekend's report of a carrier strike group moving from Northern Europe to the Caribbean, I think that is an understatement. We're talking about tens of thousands of U.S. troops in the Southcom theater. The naval presence is particularly heavy. The CSG, that's the carrier strike group, notwithstanding. We have multiple guided missile destroyers. There's a cruiser, a nuclear-powered attack submarine, and the USS Iwo Jima amphibious ready group. That carries over, so that particular group carries over 4,000 Marines and sailors. Now, on top of that, Puerto Rico has been transformed into a forward logistics hub. The formerly closed naval station, Roosevelt Roads, has been reactivated and is now home to F-35 stealth fighters, Reaper drones, and even AC-130 Ghost Rider gunships. So when you add it all up, you have a massive multi-domain military force capable of a wide spectrum of operations, far beyond what would be required for chasing down these small drug boats.
That's the central question, is it not? The force posture does not seem to align with the stated mission, which brings us to the first layer of analysis, Venezuela. The entire operation is happening in their backyard. So how does President Maduro's regime fit into this?
Well, it's right in the center of all of this. So while the administration's public narrative is about drugs, I'm talking about the Trump administration, the unspoken but clear political target is the Maduro regime in Caracas. The U.S. has been trying for years to diplomatically isolate Maduro. The military buildup here is a form of modern gunboat diplomacy. It's all about applying immense psychological pressure on Maduro and his inner circle.
And now there is reporting that the White House is considering taking this a step further with potential strikes inside Venezuela itself.
Yeah, and look, that's a significant potential escalation. So according to officials, the president is reviewing plans to target cocaine facilities and trafficking routes on Venezuelan soil. While no decision has been made, and honestly, diplomacy is supposedly still on the table, the CIA has also been authorized to conduct covert operations inside the country. So thinking among some in the Trump administration seems to be, If you squeeze the illicit revenue streams that benefit Maduro's allies, you might just pressure them into ousting him from within.
But there is a glaring inconsistency in that narrative. The United Nations and even the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration do not consider Venezuela to be a major cocaine producing country. The coca plant is grown and processed almost entirely in Colombia, Peru, and Bolivia.
And I think that's where the political narrative diverges from the data. The administration's case hinges on the 2020 U.S. indictment of Maduro for, quote, narco-terrorism, end quote, claiming that he allows traffickers to use Venezuelan territory in order to transit the illegal drugs. So while Venezuela is not the source, the U.S. is framing it as a critical enabler, which that now provides the public justification for the military pressure. It's a pretext that serves a broader geopolitical goal.
Which leads us to the most intriguing and perhaps most important layer of this deployment. This feels like an enormous amount of strategic effort just for Venezuela. Is there a bigger, more global game at play here?
I believe so. And I think that game involves China. Now, I want to be clear. My analysis is currently at possible for what we are about to discuss here. And this overt massing of forces could just be for regime change in Venezuela. But we need to look at the map and think about long-term strategic priorities. Now, the most vital waterway in the Western Hemisphere for the U.S. military is the Panama Canal. It is the artery that allows the U.S. Navy to rapidly move fleets from the Atlantic to the Pacific.
To reinforce the Indo-Pacific Command in the event of a crisis, right?
Exactly. In any potential conflict scenario with China, especially one concerning Taiwan, the ability to swing assets from the East Coast to Asia quickly and without obstruction, that's going to be non-negotiable. Now, look at Venezuela's position on the map, its proximity to the canal, and its very close political and economic ties to Beijing.
So you are suggesting that China could use Venezuela as a proxy to threaten or disrupt transit through the canal in a time of crisis.
I mean, it is a key vulnerability that a strategic planner is going to have to account for by establishing overwhelming military dominance in the Caribbean and effectively surrounding Venezuela, not to mention Colombia, which is on this administration's radar as well. The U.S. accomplishes two things. First, it sends a clear message to Maduro. But second, perhaps more importantly, it signals to Beijing that the U.S. will not permit any interference with the critical sea lane. It's a preemptive move to secure a logistical lifeline.
There has been some chatter about intelligence pointing to a possible 2026 timeline for a Chinese move on Taiwan. Could this be the U.S. setting the chessboard a year in advance?
Yeah, and just exactly how long-range strategic planning works here. You identify potential vulnerabilities, you mitigate them well before they can be exploited. Now, this deployment neutralizes a potential threat to force projection, ensuring that when and if a crisis erupts in the Pacific, the U.S. Navy is not caught flat-footed trying to get there. And also, not to mention, sitting on either end of the Panama Canal are two massive ports operated by the same Chinese company.
Yeah, that is very likely concerning for the U.S., especially with 2026 only a few months away now. So let's talk for a moment about some of the specific units involved, because that also tells a story. We're not just seeing standard patrols. The elite 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the Night Stalkers, have been spotted training in the area. For our listeners who may not be familiar, what does their presence signify?
Yeah, look, the Night Stalkers are known around the world as the best helicopter pilots in the world. That seems to be a fact and not an opinion. Their entire purpose is to fly special operations forces into and out of the most hostile and difficult environments imaginable. And it's always done, almost always, at night. They're the ones that flew the Navy SEALs into Abbottabad for the bin Laden raid. They were at the center of the Black Hawk Down incident in Somalia. Their presence means that the capability for high-risk direct action missions like capturing a high-value individual or destroying a specific well-defended target like a port, is on the table. Their involvement elevates the threat level exponentially, and it goes far beyond any plausible counter-narcotics mission.
So we have the overt mission against drugs, a clear political objective aimed at regime change in Venezuela, and a potential covert strategic hedge against China. It is a fascinating and, frankly, a very, very tense situation. You've given the audience a lot to think about with this deployment to the Caribbean, which creates a wide range of credible options for the president. We will certainly need an update before the end of the year and see if your analysis has shifted any. But I want to change topics now. And with so much of the world's attention focused rightly on the delicate peace process in Ukraine and the ongoing ceasefire efforts in Gaza, it is easy for other critical situations to fall through the cracks. There is a story we have been tracking that we have not had a chance to discuss, and it is one that adds yet another layer of instability to the global picture. I am talking about the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan. We have seen reports of serious military clashes, airstrikes, and a death toll in the dozens. It seems to have cooled down for now, but this feels like much more than a simple border dispute. So can you give us the broad view of what has been happening there?
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. It is far from simple. What we're seeing is a dangerous cycle of escalation here. At the most immediate level, the conflict is being driven by a group called the Taliban Pakistan, or TTP. They are the Pakistani Taliban. Now, for months, and really escalating since the last year, they have been launching deadly attacks from bases inside Afghanistan against Pakistani military and security forces.
And Pakistan is retaliating?
Yeah, and with a significant force. Now, Islamabad responded with multiple rounds of airstrikes inside Afghanistan. They claimed to target TTP camps. Now, of course, the Afghan Taliban government claims these strikes have hit civilians. So this cycle of attacks and retaliation is what led to the most recent fighting we are seeing. And then that prompted Qatar and Turkey to step in and mediate a ceasefire.
Which brings us to the central question. Why is this happening now? Since the Afghan Taliban returned to power in 2021, many assumed they would have a cooperative relationship with Pakistan, which supported them for decades. So why are they allowing the TTP to operate so freely?
Yeah, and that is at the heart of the problem here. It's a classic case of patron-client relationship that completely backfired on the patron. So for years, Pakistan viewed the Afghan Taliban as a key strategic asset. They were a tool to ensure influence in Afghanistan and counter its regional rival, that being India. Now, they nurtured and supported the Afghan Taliban. But now that the Taliban is in power, Islamabad has discovered its influence is severely limited. The Afghan Taliban is either unable or, what I think is more likely, unwilling to crack down on the TTP.
So are they allies?
But they have deep, long-standing ideological and operational ties. For the Afghan Taliban, turning on the TTP would be like turning on family. It would be a betrayal of a key ally that fought alongside them. So they provide them with safe havens, and according to some reports, have even allowed them to access some of the vast stockpiles of weapons left behind after the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. Now, from Pakistan's perspective, its former proxy is now actively enabling a group that is destabilizing the country.
Well, it's a problem entirely of their own making in some ways, but you and I have discussed this before, and I feel like the terrorism issue, as serious as it is sitting on top of an even older, deeper problem. The reports often mention the Durand Line.
Yeah, and that's what we would call the foundational issue here. So if you solve the TTP problem tomorrow, you still have not solved the core disagreement between these two nations. The Durand Line is the 2,600-kilometer border that was demarcated in 1893 between the Afghan ruler at the time and British India. Now, Pakistan, as the successor state to British India, they accept it. the entire international community, they recognize it. But no Afghan government ever has recognized its legitimacy.
And why is that?
Well, the Brits are involved, so they view it as a colonial imposition that was forced upon them. Now, critically, the line cuts directly through the homeland of the Pashtun people. It's the largest ethnic group in Afghanistan. It's a major group in Pakistan as well. This division has fueled Afghan nationalism and even movements for independence. They want an independent Pashtunistan. That's been going on for over a century now. So for the Taliban and any government in Kabul, really, formally recognizing that border would be political suicide. It's a fundamental disagreement which creates a level of mistrust that makes cooperation on anything, including counterterrorism, incredibly difficult.
I saw that when they signed this recent ceasefire, there was an issue where the Afghan Taliban reportedly pressured Qatar to remove any mention of the border from the public statement.
Yeah, exactly. And it shows how sensitive and central this issue is for them. This isn't just syntax, it is an existential point of contention.
Faced with this incredibly complex situation, what are Pakistan's options? It seems their strategy so far is not working.
I mean, their options are limited, and even then, they're frankly not very good. They've tried military force with the airstrikes. They've tried economic coercion by shutting down major border crossings. This has been a devastating blow to Afghanistan's crippled economy. They've even deported tens of thousands of Afghan refugees, but none of it has compelled the Taliban to change its stance on the TTP. These actions have only deepened the hostility between the two governments.
And this just adds to Pakistan's already challenging security environment. They are constantly managing the Eastern Front with India, and now the Western Front with Afghanistan is highly active. And that is not even mentioning their other border with Iran, which has its own unique set of challenges.
Yeah, look, it's a three-front problem for Pakistan. The instability emanating from Afghanistan. This is not a contained issue. It directly threatens Pakistan's internal stability, and it forces it to expend resources it needs for other pressing security and economic matters.
So we have this temporary ceasefire, but it feels fragile, like most of the ceasefires.
Yeah.
It is built on top of unresolved issues of terrorism, strategic rivalries, and a fundamental century-old disagreement over where the countries even begin and end. So what is the outlook here?
The general assessment is that the situation is more likely to continue deteriorating. The core drivers of the conflict remain firmly in place, so we're likely going to see this pattern: a period of tense calm, followed by a major TTP attack, a harsh Pakistani military response, and then a flurry of diplomatic activity to pull them back from the brink. It's a persistent point of instability in a region that, frankly, does not need any more of it.
It's another fire that the world is struggling to find the bandwidth to put out. When we started this podcast 4 years ago, our segments often felt like dispatches from a world on the brink. There was no special military operation in Ukraine, no active war in Gaza, and certainly no amassing of troops in the Caribbean. The hints of instability were there, but now it all seems to be coming to a head. So we will be watching closely as these events unfold. So stick with us each week as we continue to try and make sense of this world around us. As we close out, Kervin, is there anything else that you want to discuss?
So typically in this moment, I'll say, nope, that's all I have for now. And so I will say, nope, that's all I have for now.
Okay, I got a little nervous because I was like, what didn't you tell me? Okay, but now I'm cool now. I'm getting my blood pressure back to an even kill here. Because I was like, what did he
know
like?
you, and I know your blood pressure was up.
That was really rude of you to do that, but okay. I forgive you.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Do you have anything?
No, not real. No, nothing. We're good. We're good over here. You're good over there?
As good as I can be, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much for listening to This Week Explained. We hope that you found it both informative and engaging. If you have any feedback or suggestions for future episodes, we'd love to hear from you. For more in-depth coverage of these stories and more, be sure to follow us on social media at This Week Explained.
Tiana, thank you so much. And until next week, stay safe out there.